I was climbing Augusto Marcello's stone staircase in a wedding dress when his men leveled their guns at my chest. And the only thing louder than my racing pulse was the memory of Lorenzo's voice 3 hours earlier saying, "Stage it during the honeymoon. Make sure every detail points to Marcello. Firma. Stop right there." The lace bodice I'd spent 8 months hand-selecting from Florentine ateliers caught the golden glow of the wrought iron sconces. Delicate Venetian lace that was supposed to represent tradition, family, honor, not the shroud for my murder. Dark stains streaked the skirt. My carefully arranged updo was unraveling, loose strands stuck to my neck. Lipstick smeared, probably. Mascara definitely everywhere. 4 guards surrounded me on the landing. Weapons raised. Professional, quiet, unlike Lorenzo's men who always moved with too much bravado, too much noise. Then I heard footsteps from above. Augusto Marcello appeared at the top of the staircase. And even with guns trained on my heart, I couldn't stop noticing him. Tall, charcoal suit that probably cost more than the vintage Alfa Romeo my father gave Lorenzo as an engagement gift. Eyes like black coffee, dark, sharp, utterly unreadable. Face covered in tattoos that crawled up his neck and across his jaw, the kind of ink that made respectable families whisper and rival families hesitate. Hands covered in elaborate designs, one resting casually on the banister, the other loose at his side. I was trying very hard not to be terrified. He descended slowly, each step measured, predatory. When he stopped 2 stairs above me, I had to tilt my chin up to meet his gaze. Mirella Mazzi. His voice was low, accented, rough. He said my name the way other men said the word vendetta. Don Mazzi's daughter. In my house. In a wedding dress. He tilted his head slightly, and I caught the glint of an earring. This is unexpected. They're going to kill me and frame you for it. The words rushed out. Too fast, too raw. I sounded desperate. I probably looked worse, standing there in full bridal costume, shaking, disheveled, blood-stained. But his expression didn't change. And somehow that steadied me enough to breathe. Explain. One word. Not a question. A command. I gripped the iron railing, cold metal biting into my trembling fingers. 3 hours ago, I was in the vestibule at San Lorenzo Cathedral, fully dressed, waiting for the procession to begin. My sister went to find my bouquet. I heard voices in the sacristy next door. Lorenzo and 2 of his associates. They didn't know I was there. My throat tightened. I forced the words out. Lorenzo said the marriage was just theater, that I'd have an accident during our honeymoon in Positano. A fall from the cliffside villa, maybe a diving incident, something that would look tragic but plausible. I met Augusto's eyes, those cold, calculating eyes. And that when my body was found, there would be evidence linking it to you. Enough to convince my father you'd murdered me to provoke a war. One of the guards muttered something in Italian, a curse, maybe a prayer. Augusto's expression still hadn't changed. Why would I want a war with Don Mazzi? You wouldn't. My voice was stronger now. That's exactly the point. I watched Augusto's face for any sign of belief, any crack in that tattooed mask. Nothing. You expect me to accept this? He descended the final 2 stairs, and suddenly we were level. He was taller up close, broader. The ink on his neck formed patterns I couldn't quite decipher in the dim light. A bride runs from her wedding straight to her family's enemy with a story about conspiracy? I expect you to think. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Lorenzo Costa marries into the Mazzi family today. Within a month, I'm dead, and every piece of evidence says Augusto Marcello ordered it. My father, grief-stricken, furious, declares war. Your organization and mine destroy each other in the crossfire. I took a breath. And Lorenzo, the grieving widower with connections to both families, steps into the power vacuum and takes everything. One of the guards shifted behind me. Augusto's eyes never left my face. He's been planning this for months, I continued. Maybe longer. He needs both families weakened, needs the violence to create chaos. He can't move against either of you directly, but if you move against each other. He waits for us to bleed out and claims the spoils. Augusto's voice was flat, but I saw something flicker in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or calculation. Exactly. He studied me for a long moment, then turned to one of his men. Get Luca. Tell him to verify the bride's story, quietly. I want to know if Costa's been moving unusual assets, making new alliances. The guard disappeared up the stairs. Augusto looked back at me. If you're lying, if this is some elaborate setup from your father. It's not. I stepped closer, desperate. But I need something from you. My brother, Marco. He's 16, still at the estate. When Lorenzo realizes I'm gone, when this falls apart, Marco will be his next target. He'll tie up loose ends. And you want me to protect him? I want you to send someone to get him out. Tonight. Before Lorenzo can move. My hands were shaking again. Please. Augusto was silent, his dark eyes searching mine. Finally, he pulled out his phone, typed something, then pocketed it. Consider it done. But understand this, Mirella Mazzi, you just walked into a different cage. The bars might look prettier, but they're still there. You're mine now, for however long this plays out. You don't leave. You don't contact anyone. You do exactly what I say. I understand. Do you? He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. Because once you're in my world, there's no going back to yours. Even if we survive this. I met his gaze, unflinching. There's nothing left to go back to. Something shifted in his expression, not quite approval, but close. Then welcome to your new cage, Colomba. Dove. The word felt like both mockery and acknowledgement. Show her to the east wing, he told the remaining guards. And someone find her something to wear that isn't covered in blood. The room Augusto's men led me to was larger than my childhood bedroom, decorated in dark woods and cream linens that probably cost more than most people's cars. Someone had left clothes on the bed, simple black trousers, a silk blouse. No labels, but I recognized quality construction when I saw it. I changed quickly, my hands still trembling as I peeled off the ruined wedding dress. The fabric pooled at my feet like a ghost. 20 minutes later, I sat across from Augusto in what he called his study, a fortress of mahogany and leather that smelled like expensive whiskey and old paper. Two of his men flanked the door. Luca, the one he'd sent to verify my story, stood beside the desk with a tablet. Your fiancé's been busy, Luca said, his voice flat. 3 hours ago, the Costa family released a statement. The bride suffered a nervous breakdown before the ceremony. She's been taken to a private facility for rest and treatment. No visitors. My stomach dropped. He's already controlling the narrative. And buying himself time, Augusto added, leaning back in his chair. Time to find you, or time to adjust his plan. He studied me with those unreadable dark eyes. Tell me everything. From the beginning. What exactly did you hear? I walked him through it, Lorenzo's voice in the sacristy, the casual way he discussed my death, the planted evidence, the timeline. Augusto listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When I finished, he stood and walked to a filing cabinet, returning with a leather folder. He dropped it on the desk in front of me. If you're as valuable as you claim, prove it. I opened the folder. Shipping manifests, customs documents, authentication certificates for art pieces, dozens of them, all stamped and signed. What am I looking for? Inconsistencies. Problems. Anything that doesn't belong. He crossed his arms. You said you studied art authentication at university. Show me it wasn't just decorative education. I spread the documents across the desk, my art history training kicking in automatically. My eyes moved over provenance papers, export licenses, Italian customs stamps. Most people wouldn't notice. Most people weren't trained to spot the tiny details that separated genuine from forgery. Then I saw it. This one. I pulled out a customs certificate dated 3 months ago. The stamp is wrong. See the seal? Italian customs changed their official stamp design last year. The eagle's wings are positioned differently now. This uses the old design, but it's dated after the change. Augusto leaned forward, his expression shifting slightly. I pulled out 2 more documents. Same problem here. And this authentication seal, the registration number format is incorrect. It should have 9 digits, not 8. How long did that take you? Luca asked. 3 minutes. Augusto's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. My analysts missed those. They've been looking at these files for 2 weeks. Your analysts weren't raised in museums. I met his gaze. Is this enough proof, or do you need more? Augusto gave me an office. Not a room, an office, with a desk, 3 monitors, and file boxes stacked against the wall like a paper fortress. Luca brought me espresso in a tiny cup that probably cost more than my monthly allowance used to. Everything we have on Costa's business dealings for the past year, Augusto said, gesturing to the boxes. Financial records, shipping manifests, surveillance photos. If there's a pattern, find it. I worked through the night. The espresso kept coming, delivered by silent guards who watched me like I might bolt. I didn't. I was too focused on the paper trail unfolding in front of me. Lorenzo's legitimate businesses were a maze: galleries in Milan and Florence, an auction house in Rome, consulting work for private collectors. All of it clean on the surface. But underneath, when I started cross-referencing the shipping records with the art market databases I'd memorized during university, the picture changed. 3 months ago, a Caravaggio study sold through Lorenzo's Milan gallery, shipped to a buyer in Marseille. Except the provenance documentation listed a painting that had been in a private Swiss collection for decades. The real piece was still there. I'd seen it catalogued in an art journal last month. 2 months ago, a Renaissance bronze authenticated by Lorenzo's firm, exported to New York. But the authentication certificate bore the signature of a restoration expert who died 4 years ago. 5 weeks ago, a crate labeled 16th century ceramics cleared customs with Lorenzo's paperwork, destined for a warehouse in Naples. The listed weight didn't match the declared contents. Ceramics that size should have been heavier. I pulled up surveillance photos Augusto's people had taken of Lorenzo's warehouse operations. Men loading crates, clipboard inspections, routine business. Then I saw him, a man in his 50s, gray hair, expensive watch, signing off on a shipment. I zoomed in on the paperwork in his hand. The signature was barely visible, but I recognized the authentication format. I'd seen it dozens of times in the documents spread across my desk. I cross-referenced the signature against Augusto's personnel files that Luca had grudgingly provided. There. Giulio Costa. Lieutenant in Augusto's organization. 30 years of service. Impeccable record. And Lorenzo's second cousin. I pulled every document with Giulio's authentication stamp, every shipment he'd signed off on. The pattern was undeniable: weapons shipments disguised as art acquisitions, moving through both organizations with paperwork that would fool anyone who wasn't trained to spot the forgeries. Giulio had access to both families' operations. He authenticated the fake provenance documents that made the shipments look legitimate. He was the bridge that made Lorenzo's conspiracy possible. When Augusto walked into the office at dawn, I had everything laid out on the desk like evidence at a trial. "You have a traitor," I said quietly. "And he's been working with Lorenzo for at least 6 months." Augusto's expression went deadly cold. "Show me." I did. Augusto made 3 phone calls. Within an hour, Giulio Costa was sitting in a chair in the study, his hands zip-tied behind his back, blood trickling from his nose. 2 guards stood behind him. I watched from the corner, my arms crossed, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Mirella found something interesting in your paperwork," Augusto said, his voice conversational. He held up one of the forged authentication certificates. "Want to explain why you're signing off on shipments that don't exist?" Giulio's eyes darted to me, then back to Augusto. "I don't know what she's talking about." "That's legitimate." "Don't." Augusto's voice dropped to something dangerous. "I've known you for 30 years, Giulio. I gave you a position of trust. And you've been feeding information to Lorenzo Costa, authenticating his fake shipments, giving him access to our routes." He leaned forward. "How long?" The silence stretched. Then Giulio's shoulders sagged. 8 months. He approached me after his engagement to the Mozzi girl was announced. Said he needed someone on the inside, someone who could move things quietly. He promised me a percentage when he took over. "When he took over," Augusto repeated softly. "After I was dead, you mean?" "After Mirella's murder started a war that destroyed both families." Giulio didn't answer. He didn't need to. Augusto nodded to his guards. "Take him downstairs. I'll deal with him later." They dragged Giulio out, and the door closed with a heavy click. I exhaled slowly, uncrossing my arms. My hands were shaking again. "You were right." Augusto turned to me, his expression unreadable. "About all of it." "I just followed the paper trail." "No." He crossed the room until he was standing directly in front of me. "You saw patterns my own people missed. You identified a traitor who'd been embedded for months. You did in one night what my analysts couldn't do in weeks." His dark eyes held mine. "You're not just a bride who overheard a conversation, Mirella. You're a weapon." Lorenzo was too stupid to see it, but I'm not. The words should have felt clinical, cold. Instead, they felt like validation. "Your brother's safe," he added quietly. "My people got him out 3 hours ago. He's in a secure location outside the city." Relief hit me so hard I almost swayed. "Thank you. I keep my word." He reached up, his tattooed hand brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. The gesture was careful, almost gentle. "Even in cages." We stood there in the dim study, the space between us charged with something I didn't want to name. Professional respect, maybe. Or recognition, 2 people who understood what it meant to be underestimated and what it cost to prove otherwise. "We have work to do," I said finally. "Yes," Augusto agreed. But neither of us moved. We spread the evidence across Augusto's desk like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Forged documents, financial records showing Lorenzo's shell companies, surveillance photos of Giulio's meetings, recorded confessions. Everything we needed to prove the conspiracy. "It's not enough," Augusto said. I looked up from the photographs. "What do you mean?" "This is irrefutable." "For me, yes. For any objective observer, yes." He tapped the folder. "But your father isn't objective. He chose Lorenzo personally. Negotiated the marriage contract. Gave his blessing. This evidence says he was played, manipulated, made a fool of. Augusto's expression was grim. Men like your father don't accept that easily. So what are you saying? I'm saying if I present this to him, he'll assume I fabricated it. That I coerced Giulio's confession, forged the documents, orchestrated everything to frame Lorenzo and destabilize his family. He met my eyes. The evidence has to come from someone he'll believe. Someone with nothing to gain from lying. The realization settled over me like cold water. Me. You, Augusto confirmed. You have to face your father and tell him everything. Show him the evidence. Make him understand that Lorenzo was going to murder you and use your death to destroy both families. I sat down slowly, my legs suddenly unsteady. He might not believe me. Lorenzo's already told him I had a breakdown. What if my father thinks I'm hysterical, that I've been manipulated by you? That's the risk. What if he sides with Lorenzo? What if he sees my running to you as the real betrayal? My voice was rising. He could hand me over, Augusto. He could decide his alliance with the Costa family is worth more than his daughter's life? Augusto's tone was neutral, but his eyes were sharp. Yes. He could. The truth of it hit hard. My father had arranged this marriage like a business transaction. I'd always known it, but knowing and accepting were different things. There's another option, Augusto said quietly. We disappear. I have resources, safe houses in other countries. We take Marco and vanish. Lorenzo's plan falls apart without you, and eventually the truth might surface on its own. And my father goes to war with you anyway, because he'll never know the real story. I shook my head. More people die. Lorenzo still wins. Possibly. I stood, my decision crystallizing. No. I have to do this. It's the only way to stop Lorenzo, protect Marco, and prevent the war. I looked at Augusto. When do we go? Tomorrow. I'll arrange a neutral location. He studied my face. Are you certain? No, I admitted. But I'm doing it anyway. Something flickered in his expression, respect, maybe, or recognition. Then we prepare you for war, Colomba. The meeting place was a private room in a restaurant that had been in operation since before either family existed, neutral ground, owned by neither, respected by both. Augusto's car pulled up to the back entrance just after sunset. I'd dressed carefully. Black trousers, a cream blouse, my hair pulled back severely. No jewelry except the small gold cross my mother had given me before she died. I wanted to look competent, serious. Not like a bride who'd had a breakdown. Augusto walked me to the door, two of his men flanking us. He carried the leather folder containing all the evidence, everything we'd compiled over the past 3 days. Remember, he said, handing me the folder. Your father will try to dismiss you, to make you feel small. Don't let him. I know how he operates. I know you do. His tattooed hand rested briefly on my shoulder. But knowing and resisting are different things. You survived this long by being underestimated, Mirella. Make him see what he missed. I nodded, my throat tight. And if things go wrong? They won't. His dark eyes held mine. If they do, my men are outside. Say the word tempesta and they come in. Storm. I memorized it. Then I walked through the door alone. My father sat at the head of a long table, flanked by 2 of his senior captains. He looked older than I remembered, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his mouth. When he saw me, his expression shifted from surprise to something harder. Mirella. His voice was controlled, careful. "I'm told you wished to speak with me." I did. I set the folder on the table but didn't sit. 3 days ago, I was supposed to marry Lorenzo Costa. Instead, I ran. Do you know why? Lorenzo explained everything. "You suffered a breakdown, emotional distress." I overheard him planning my murder. The words cut through the room like glass. In the sacristy at San Lorenzo, hours before the ceremony. He was on the phone with his associate, discussing the accident he'd arranged for our honeymoon. The one that would kill me and frame Augusto Marcello, starting a war that would let Lorenzo take control of both families. My father's face remained impassive. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth." I pushed the folder toward him. "And I have proof. Financial records showing Lorenzo's shell companies. Forged authentication documents he used to move weapons through both organizations. Surveillance photos of his meetings with Giulio Costa, your ally's second cousin, who happens to be a lieutenant in Marcello's organization and has been feeding Lorenzo information for months. This could all be fabricated. By who? By me?" I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. "Or by Augusto Marcello, who had no reason to suspect Lorenzo until I showed up at his door in a wedding dress, warning him he was being framed for my murder?" One of the captains shifted uncomfortably. "You raised me to be decorative," I continued, my voice steady. "Cultured, educated, marriageable. A bargaining chip. But you never asked if I was paying attention." My father stared at the folder for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Bring Lorenzo Costa here. Now." He ended the call and looked at me. "If you're wrong about this, Mirella, the consequences will be severe." "I'm not wrong." We waited in tense silence. My father opened the folder, scanning the documents with methodical precision. His captains exchanged glances but said nothing. I remained standing, my hands clasped in front of me to keep them from shaking. 15 minutes later, the door opened. Lorenzo walked in, perfectly composed in a tailored suit, his expression shifting to concern when he saw me. "Mirella, cara, thank God." He moved toward me. "When you disappeared, I was terrified. The doctors said you needed rest, but I've been so worried." "Sit down, Lorenzo." My father's voice stopped in mid-step. Lorenzo's eyes flickered between us, calculating. He sat across from me, his posture relaxed, confident. "Don Mazzi, I don't understand. Has something happened? My daughter has made some interesting accusations." My father pushed the folder across the table. "She claims you planned to murder her and frame Augusto Marcello for it." Lorenzo's expression transformed into perfect shock and hurt. "What? That's insane. Mirella, you're not well. Augusto Marcello has clearly manipulated you, poisoned your mind against me. These documents are fabricated," he continued, barely glancing at them. "Marcello had 3 days to create whatever story he wanted. This is exactly what he does, sows division, turns families against each other." He looked at my father with wounded sincerity. "I love your daughter. The idea that I would harm her is absurd." "Is it?" My father's tone was neutral. "Of course it is." Lorenzo's voice rose slightly, genuinely indignant now. "She ran to our enemy wearing her wedding dress. She's been living in his house, listening to his lies. She's traumatized, confused." My father raised his hand. Lorenzo fell silent. "Bring him in," my father said to one of his captains. The door opened again. 2 men dragged Giulio Costa into the room. His face was bruised and swollen, his expensive suit torn and stained with blood. They forced him into a chair beside Lorenzo. Lorenzo's carefully constructed expression cracked. Just for a second, but I saw it. So did my father. Giulio has been very cooperative, my father said quietly. He's confirmed everything in these documents. The forged authentications. The weapons shipments disguised as art acquisitions. The plan to murder Mirella and frame Marcello. He paused. He's also confirmed that you, Lorenzo, orchestrated all of it. He's lying, they tortured him, made him say. Enough. My father's voice cut like a blade. He looked at Lorenzo with something cold and final in his eyes. You tried to murder my daughter. You tried to destroy my family. He gave a single nod. Lorenzo didn't even have time to stand before the gunshot echoed through the room. The meeting happened 4 days later in my father's study, the same room where he'd negotiated my marriage contract to Lorenzo. This time, Augusto sat across from him, and I stood between them, refusing the chair my father offered. Mirella. My father's voice was careful, measured. It's time to discuss your future. What happened with Lorenzo was unfortunate. But there are other alliances to consider, other families. No. The word came out firm, final. My father's expression hardened. You're still my daughter. You still have responsibilities. I fulfilled my responsibility. I saved both families from a war that would have destroyed everything you built. I met his eyes. I'm not a bargaining chip anymore. Then what exactly do you propose? Augusto's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. You can't return to your old life. Lorenzo's family will want revenge, even if they don't dare move openly. You're a target now. I know. I'd thought about this for 4 days, planned every word. Which is why I'm proposing something new. An art gallery and authentication business in Milan. High-end, legitimate, catering to collectors and museums. My father frowned. You want to open a gallery? I want to build an intelligence network. I looked between them. Art moves through borders easily. Collectors talk. Authentication work gives access to shipping manifests, customs documentation, financial records. A gallery creates cover for meetings, transactions, information exchange. I turned to Augusto. You need legitimate fronts for your operations. I can provide that. But I want full autonomy, my business, my decisions. Funded by whom? My father asked sharply. By me, Augusto said. He'd been watching me with those dark, calculating eyes. Initial investment and operational support. In exchange for the intelligence network and authentication services. And you trust her with this? My father challenged. She identified a conspiracy my own people missed. She walked into a room knowing she might be killed to deliver evidence that saved both our organizations. Augusto's gaze didn't leave my face. Yes. I trust her. My father was silent for a long moment. You're asking for independence. Complete autonomy. Partnership with the Marcello family. Equal partnership, I corrected. Not as an asset. Not as a subsidiary. As a partner. You're my daughter. Which is exactly why you should let me go. I kept my voice steady. You raised me to be ornamental. I'm offering to be operational instead. Give me this, and I'll provide more value than any marriage alliance ever could. The silence stretched. Finally, my father exhaled slowly. You've changed. No, I said quietly. You just finally noticed. He looked at Augusto, then back at me. Fine. You have my blessing. But understand, if this fails, if you compromise either family, it won't fail. My father stood, the meeting clearly over. Then I suppose we have an agreement. The gallery opened on a cold November evening in Milan's Brera district. Galleria Mazzi occupied 3 floors of a restored palazzo, its windows glowing warm against the dark street. Inside, collectors in tailored suits and designer gowns moved between Renaissance paintings and contemporary sculptures, champagne flutes in hand, voices echoing off marble floors. I watched from the mezzanine, wearing black silk and satisfaction. In 6 months, we'd authenticated pieces for 7 major museums, brokered acquisitions for collectors in 4 countries, and identified 2 smuggling operations that had been using art shipments to move contraband. The gallery was profitable, respected, and exactly the intelligence hub I'd promised. Augusto appeared beside me, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back. He'd traded his usual dark suits for something slightly softer tonight, though the tattoos on his neck still drew stares from the more traditional guests. "Successful evening," he murmured. "Very. I just closed a deal with a German industrialist whose shipping company operated throughout Eastern Europe. His assistant had mentioned route changes, increased customs scrutiny, information that would be valuable within the week. Your father's here," Augusto said. "He's been staring at the Caravaggio study for 20 minutes. I spotted him across the gallery, gray hair and expensive suit, examining the painting I'd authenticated last month. He'd visited the gallery twice since it opened, always formal, always brief. We were still learning how to speak to each other as something other than patriarch and property. "Come with me," Augusto said. "I have something to show you." He led me through the back hallways to his car, then drove us to his estate. I'd been staying there more than my own apartment lately. It was easier, practical. That's what I told myself, anyway. Inside, he guided me to a room I'd never entered. When he opened the door, I stopped breathing. The space had been transformed into a restoration studio. Natural light flooded through skylights. Work tables lined the walls, equipped with magnifying lamps, tools, chemical solutions. Storage drawers for delicate materials. A comfortable chair positioned near the windows. My own private sanctuary. "Augusto. Every cage needs an escape route," he said quietly. "Even the ones we choose." I turned to find him holding a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, Renaissance era, gold band with an engraved pattern of vines and flowers. Genuine, probably 16th century, museum quality. "This isn't a transaction," he said. "Not a merger or alliance or strategic arrangement. This is me asking if you want to build something together. As equals. As partners who chose each other." I looked at the ring, at the studio, at the tattooed, dangerous man who'd seen me as a weapon when everyone else saw decoration. "Yes," I said. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and I kissed him in the studio he'd built for my freedom, no longer the bride who ran, but the woman who stayed by choice. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe so you don't miss the next Mafia love story. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what you thought of this narrator. Your feedback really helps me make these even better for you. Thank you for letting my stories keep you company.